My name is Charlotte. I'm 22 years old, and while every other graduate was receiving flowers and hugs today, I was holding the legal papers that erased me from my family. The morning sun hit my dorm window with a cheerfulness that felt like a personal insult. It was graduation day. For most of the seniors in the hallway outside, that meant champagne mimosas and relief. For me, it meant a stomach tied in knots so tight I couldn't even manage a sip of water. I stared at myself in the cracked full-length mirror attached to the back of my door. The girl staring back looked like she hadn't slept in 3 years, mostly because she hadn't. My blonde hair was pulled back into a severe, practical bun, the kind that said, "I'm here to work, not to socialize." Dark circles bruised the skin under my eyes, defying the layer of drugstore concealer I'd just applied. "Come on, Charlotte," I whispered, my voice raspy. "Just 6 hours. Survive 6 hours, and you never have to see them again." I turned to my bed, where the black graduation gown lay like a puddle of ink. Underneath it, I was wearing a simple navy blue dress I'd found at a thrift store for $12. It was clean and pressed, but I knew what Bradford and Eleanor would see. They'd see the slightly frayed hem. They'd see the lack of a designer label. They'd see failure. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. My heart jumped into my throat, assuming it was my mother demanding to know where to park the Bentley. But it wasn't. The screen lit up with a secure notification from the Titan Global app. Sender, S. Thorne. Message, "The jet touched down. I have the documents. Are you ready for the launch?" A small, genuine smile finally broke through my anxiety. I tapped out a quick reply. "Always. See you at the podium." I had lived a double life for the past 2 years. To the university, I was Charlotte, the scholarship student who worked double shifts at the library and looked like she was drowning. To Silas Thorne, the most feared man in tech, I was C, the strategist who had quietly restructured his logistics division from a laptop in a cramped dorm room between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. I pulled the black gown over my head. It smelled like industrial starch. It was heavy, but it hid the cheap dress. It hid the trembling in my hands. I grabbed my cap and walked out into the hallway. The air smelled of cheap perfume and excitement. I kept my head down, dodging a group of girls taking selfies. I walked toward the stadium, dragging my feet. The closer I got to the designated meeting spot, Gate B, the harder it was to breathe. They were coming. The people who gave me my name, but refused to give me a home unless I became exactly what they wanted.
Gate B was a chaotic sea of balloons, bouquets, and tearful embraces. I stood near a concrete pillar, trying to make myself as small as possible. The humidity was already rising, making my gown stick to my skin. But a different kind of chill settled in my bones when I saw the silver Mercedes S-Class glide through the traffic. It moved like a shark through a school of minnows, silent and predatory. The car stopped right at the curb, ignoring the no idling signs. The driver's door didn't open. Instead, the rear doors clicked. First came the polished Italian leather loafers, then the hem of a cream-colored silk skirt. Bradford and Eleanor had arrived. My father, Bradford, adjusted his cufflinks before he even looked at me. He was a tall man who wore his wealth like armor, impenetrable and gleaming. My mother, Eleanor, looked as if she had just stepped out of a catalog for country club wives. Her hair was a helmet of perfectly sprayed brunette curls, not a single strand daring to move in the breeze. I took a breath, forced a smile onto my face, and stepped forward. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad." Bradford looked at me over the rim of his sunglasses. He didn't move to hug me. He didn't even smile. He just scanned me from head to toe, his eyes lingering on the slightly scuffed toes of my flats visible beneath the gown. "Charlotte," he said, his voice flat, "you look disheveled." "It's been a long week, Dad. Finals were excuses," he interrupted, checking his gold Rolex. "We have a reservation at Le Bernardin at 7. Do try not to drag this ceremony out." Eleanor stepped closer, the scent of Chanel No. 5 wafting off her like a chemical weapon. She reached out, but instead of hugging me, her cold fingers pinched a stray lock of my blonde hair, tucking it aggressively behind my ear. "You didn't dye it back," she noted, her tone dripping with disappointment. "We told you the blonde makes you look frivolous, unserious." "I like it," I muttered, looking at the ground. "And that," Eleanor sighed, "is exactly the problem. You like things that are beneath us." She opened her Birkin bag, a bag that cost more than my entire college tuition, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It wasn't sealed with a festive sticker. It was clasped with a heavy metal prong. "Here," she said, thrusting it against my chest. I instinctively grabbed it. It was heavy. "What is this? A card?" "It's considered a settlement of accounts," Bradford said, his eyes hard. "Open it when they call your name. It's the only graduation gift you deserve." My stomach dropped. I looked from the envelope to their faces. There was no warmth there, only a cold, businesslike finality. "Go find your seat," Eleanor dismissed me, turning her back to adjust her oversized sunglasses. "We'll be in the VIP box. Try not to trip on stage." I stood there for a moment, clutching the envelope, watching my parents walk away toward the priority entrance. They didn't look back, not once. The auditorium was a cavernous beast, humming with the noise of 3,000 students and their families. The air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the body heat, leaving the air stale and thick. I found my seat in row 42, squeezed between a guy who smelled like stale beer and a girl furiously applying lip gloss. The manila envelope sat on my lap like a lead weight. "Open it when they call your name," Eleanor had said. But I couldn't wait. The curiosity was a physical itch, a scratching at the back of my mind that drowned out the dean's opening remarks about bright futures and limitless horizons. I hunched forward, creating a small tent of privacy with my gown. My fingers trembled as I bent the metal prongs back. Snap, snap. The sound seemed deafening in the lull between speeches. I slid the contents out just an inch. It wasn't a card. It wasn't a check. The first page was thick, cream-colored legal bond paper. At the top, in bold, terrifying letters, "Notice of severance and termination of financial support." My breath hitched. I pulled it out further. Behind it was a copy of a last will and testament with a heavy red stamp across one section, "Revoked." I forced myself to read the cover letter clipped to the front. It was written in my father's sharp, angular handwriting. "Charlotte, we have given you 4 years to correct your course. You have chosen mediocrity. You have rejected the path of legacy for the path of least resistance. Since you insist on living like a peasant, you shall live as one. As of noon today, the trust is frozen. The apartment lease is canceled. The car is property of the family trust and must be returned. Consider this your true education. Sink or swim." The words blurred. A hot, prickling sensation climbed up my neck and settled behind my eyes. They hadn't just cut me off. They had choreographed it. They waited until the exact moment I should have been proudest, just to make sure I felt the smallest. "Hey, are you okay?" the girl with the lip gloss whispered, nudging my elbow. "You look like you're gonna throw up." I shoved the papers back into the envelope with shaking hands. "I'm fine," I choked out, staring straight ahead at the blurred stage. "Just allergies." I looked up toward the VIP box on the mezzanine level. I couldn't see their faces clearly from this distance, but I knew they were watching, waiting for me to crumble, waiting for me to run out of the auditorium in tears so they could tell their friends, "See, she never had the stamina." I gripped the envelope so hard the edges crinkled. I wouldn't run. I would sit here and I would take it, because they didn't know what or who was coming next.
A hush fell over the arena, sudden and absolute, like a heavy blanket dropped from the rafters. The dean of students stepped aside, adjusting the microphone with a reverence usually reserved for heads of state. "Ladies and gentlemen, graduates," the dean announced, his voice echoing, "it is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, a man who needs no introduction, but whose vision has reshaped the global economy, the founder and CEO of Titan Global, Mr. Silas Thorne." The applause was polite at first, then thunderous as Silas Thorne walked onto the stage. He didn't walk like a normal person. He moved with a calculated, predatory grace. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my parents' country club membership, tailored to perfection. He was younger than most billionaires, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair cut close and eyes that seemed to scan the entire crowd in seconds. I sat up straighter, clutching the envelope to my chest. My parents idolized this man. Bradford had a framed cover of Forbes featuring Thorne in his office. Eleanor quoted his biography at dinner parties. To them, he was a god of industry. To me, he was the guy who texted me memes about supply chain logistics at 3 a.m. Thorne reached the podium. He didn't smile, he didn't pull out index cards, he just leaned into the mic, his hands gripping the sides of the lectern. "Most of you," Thorne began, his voice deep and gravelly, carrying without effort, "are going to fail." A nervous titter ran through the crowd. "I'm serious," he continued, his face impassive. "You've spent 4 years following a syllabus. You've been told what to read, what to think, and how to act to get an A. The real world doesn't have a syllabus. It doesn't care about your GPA. It cares about value. It cares about grit." I risked a glance up at the VIP box. Even from here, I could tell Bradford was leaning forward, hanging on every word. He loved this survival of the fittest rhetoric. "I built Titan Global on a simple principle. I don't hire resumes. I hire hunger. I hire the people who are willing to work when no one is watching, the ones who are underestimated." My phone buzzed against my thigh again. I slipped it out under the cover of my down. Sender, S. Thorne. Message, row 42, seat 18. "Stop slouching, C. You're a VP now." A shock of electricity went through me. I snapped my spine straight, my eyes locking onto the tiny figure on the stage. He couldn't possibly see me from there, but I knew he knew exactly where I was. He always did his research. "Some of the brightest minds in my company," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, "didn't come from the Ivy League elite. They came from the trenches." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "And today," he added, a glint of mischief in his eyes, "I'm here to make an announcement that will prove it."
The ceremony dragged on, a slow procession of polyester and pomp. When the dean finally reached the V's, my legs felt like they were made of lead. Charlotte Vance. The sound of my name over the loudspeakers was distorted, booming, and impersonal. I stood up. The walk to the stage was a blur of bright lights. and the rhythmic thud of my heels on the hollow wooden stairs. I accepted the diploma tube with a mechanical smile, shaking the hand of a trustee I'd never met. Usually, this is the part where you look into the crowd. You find your family, you wave, you share a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. I stared straight ahead, fixing my eyes on the exit sign at the back of the arena. I refused to give the VIP box the satisfaction of seeing me search for them. I refused to let them see the moisture gathering in my eyes. I walked off the stage, and instead of returning to my seat immediately, I slipped into the side concourse. I needed air. The envelope tucked inside my gown felt radioactive. But I wasn't fast enough. "Charlotte!" The voice was sharp, cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a whip. I turned to see Bradford and Eleanor marching toward me near the concession stands. They weren't smiling. They looked like they were arriving at a hostile corporate takeover. "We saw you," Eleanor hissed, closing the distance. "You didn't even acknowledge us, after everything we've paid for." "You just fired me from the family, Mom," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I didn't think you wanted a wave." Bradford stepped in, looming over me. He held out a manicured hand, palm up. "The keys," he demanded. I blinked, taken aback. "What, now? I need to get my things from the dorm." "The lease is terminated as of noon," Bradford cut in, his voice icy and loud enough that a passing family stopped to stare. "Your junk is on the curb. The car goes back to the dealership on Monday. I want the keys, now." "Dad, please," I whispered, feeling the heat rush to my cheeks. "Let them watch," he sneered. "Maybe they'll learn the price of ingratitude." I reached into the pocket of my dress under the gown. My fingers brushed the cool metal key fob for the beat-up sedan they had graciously loaned me for 4 years. It was my only way out of here, my only way to transport my boxes. I pulled it out. Bradford snatched it from my hand before I could even fully extend my arm. "You're on your own, Charlotte," Eleanor said, smoothing her silk skirt, looking bored. "Don't come crying to us when reality hits." They turned on their heels and walked back toward the VIP entrance, leaving me standing next to a hot dog stand, clutching a fake diploma and a real disownment notice. I had no car, no home, no family. I looked at the ground, blinking back tears. Then I remembered the phone in my hand. I remembered the text. "Stop slouching, see?" I took a deep breath, wiped my face, and turned back toward the auditorium doors. Act 3 was about to start, and I had a feeling the script was about to change. I slipped back into my seat just as the applause for the final graduate died down. My row was empty. Most students had already drifted toward the exits to find their families. I sat alone, the plastic seat feeling hard and cold beneath me. On stage, Silas Thorne walked back to the microphone. He didn't look at his watch or the dean. He looked like a man who had just decided to rewrite the schedule. "Please, sit down," Thorne commanded. It wasn't a request. The shuffling of feet stopped. The murmuring ceased. Even the parents in the stands, anxious to beat the traffic, froze. "Before we conclude," Thorne said, his voice echoing with a new, sharper intensity, "I want to address a rumor." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "There has been speculation that Titan Global is opening a new North American headquarters right here in this city. A ripple of excitement went through the crowd. I looked up at the VIP box. I could see two silhouettes pressed against the glass. Bradford and Eleanor. They were undoubtedly salivating. A Titan HQ meant property values soaring, contracts, prestige. It was everything they worshipped. The rumors are true. We break ground next month. Cheering erupted, but Thorne cut it off with a raised hand. However, I will not be running it. I don't have the time, and frankly, I don't have the local insight. He stepped out from behind the podium, taking the microphone with him, walking to the very edge of the stage. The house lights dimmed, leaving him in a pool of stark white light. For the past 2 years, I have been mentoring a student at this university. While her peers were partying, she was analyzing supply chains. While you were sleeping, she was restructuring my logistics division. She has been working remotely as my lead strategist under a pseudonym to avoid distractions. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. She is the most ruthless, efficient, and brilliant mind I have encountered in a decade, Thorne said, his eyes scanning the darkness of the auditorium until they locked onto section 42. And as of this morning, she is the youngest vice president in Titan Global's history. The gasp from the audience was audible. I felt the blood drain from my face, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of the moment. Thorne raised a hand, pointing a finger directly into the crowd, directly at me. "Charlotte Vance, please stand up." A spotlight, heavy and blinding, swung from the rafters. It swept across the sea of black caps and gowns before snapping into place right on me. I blinked against the glare, shielding my eyes. "Don't be shy, see?" Thorne's voice softened just a fraction, audible only because of the massive speakers. "Stand up. Your team is waiting." Slowly, I rose. My legs were shaking, but I stood tall. I let the cheap thrift store dress stay. I let the messy bun stay messy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thorne said, grinning now, "meet the new head of Titan Northeast. Starting salary, $250,000, plus stock options." The silence shattered.
The walk from my seat to the stage wasn't the same as the walk for the diploma. That first walk had been a march to the gallows. This one felt like walking on air. I could feel the thousands of eyes on me, confusion, envy, awe. But the only gaze I cared about was up in the mezzanine. I imagined Bradford choking on his scotch. I imagined Eleanor's perfect jaw hitting the floor. When I reached the stairs, Silas Thorne didn't wait at the podium. He walked down the steps to meet me on the floor level. The crowd went wild. The billionaire CEO coming down to meet a student? It was unheard of. "You're late for work," he deadpanned as he reached me, though his eyes were warm. "Traffic was murder," I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos around us. He extended a hand. I took it. It wasn't a patronizing pat. It was a firm, equal handshake. "Welcome to the big leagues, Charlotte." "Thank you, Silas." "Car's out back," he murmured, leaning in so the microphone wouldn't catch it. "The real car. Driver's name is Marcus. He's already picked up your boxes from the curb. Your new apartment is fully furnished. Keycard is in the glove box." I almost laughed. Of course he knew. He probably had a satellite tracking the moving truck my parents had hired. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling a lump form in my throat, this time from gratitude. "For everything." We turned to walk toward the exit tunnel, side by side. The cameras were flashing now, a strobe light effect that was dizzying. And then I saw them. Bradford and Eleanor were scrambling down the VIP stairs, pushing past a security guard. They looked frantic. Their composure was gone. Bradford's tie was crooked. Eleanor was actually running, something I had never seen her do in my entire life. "Charlotte! Charlotte, wait!" Bradford yelled, waving his arms like a man drowning. Silas stopped. He looked at me, one eyebrow raised. "Do we have time for this?" I looked at my parents, panting and flushed as they reached the barrier rope. They looked small. They looked desperate. "Just a minute," to Silas. I walked over to the velvet rope. Bradford reached out to grab my hand, but I took a small step back, out of range. "Honey," Eleanor gasped, clutching her chest. "Oh my God, we had no idea. Why didn't you tell us?" "Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly. "Of course it matters," Bradford sputtered, putting on his best boardroom smile, though his eyes were nervously darting towards Silas. We were testing you. Tough love. We knew you had greatness in you. We just needed to push you to find it." "A test?" I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes, exactly." Eleanor nodded vigorously, her eyes shining with fake tears. "And you passed. You passed with flying colors. Now cancel that silly driver. We'll take you to dinner. We can discuss your portfolio. Dad has some great ideas for how to manage that signing bonus." I looked at them, really looked at them. For years, their approval was the only currency that mattered to me. I had starved myself for it. I had worked myself to the bone for it. And now that I had it, I realized it was worthless. It was counterfeit money.
The noise of the arena faded into a dull roar, leaving only the sound of my father's heavy breathing and the clicking of cameras in the distance. "Manage my bonus?" I asked softly. "We have the best financial advisors," Bradford said quickly, his eyes darting to the envelope still clutched in my left hand. "We need to protect the family assets. We need to—" "The family assets," I interrupted. I looked down at the manila envelope. The edges were bent from where I had gripped it in terror just an hour ago. Now it didn't look scary. It looked like a receipt for a transaction I was happy to close. "You're right, Dad," I said. "You should protect your assets, and I should protect mine." I held out the envelope. Bradford blinked, confused. "What is this? You want me to tear it up?" "No," I said, my voice steady and cold, echoing the tone he used in boardrooms. "I want you to keep it. It's a legal document, after all. You wouldn't want a breach of contract." I pressed the heavy packet of papers into his chest. He instinctively grabbed it, looking down at the bold letters, "Notice of Severance." "Charlotte, stop this," Eleanor pleaded, her voice cracking. She reached for my arm, her fingers trembling. "We are your parents. You can't just walk away with him." She gestured vaguely at Silas, who was checking his watch with practiced indifference a few feet away. "We raised you." "You didn't raise me," I corrected her, stepping back so her hand swiped at empty air. "You invested in me, and today you decided to liquidate that investment at a loss." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won the negotiation of a lifetime. "Bad business move, Mom." I turned my back on them. I didn't wait for a rebuttal. I didn't wait for the inevitable guilt trip. I simply pivoted on my heel and walked towards Silas. "Ready?" Silas asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "Ready," I replied. We walked out of the tunnel and into the blinding afternoon sun. The air smelled of exhaust and freedom. A sleek black sedan, a beast of a car with tinted windows, was idling at the curb. A driver in a sharp suit opened the rear door. Inside, it was cool and quiet. The leather seats smelled like success. As I slid in, I saw my reflection in the dark window. The tired girl from the dorm room was gone. The frightened daughter was gone. As the door closed, sealing out the noise of the world, I looked out the window one last time. I saw Bradford and Eleanor standing by the security barrier, looking small and gray, clutching the papers that had set me free. Silas sat opposite me and tapped the partition. "Where to, VP?" he asked. I settled back into the seat, watching the university and my past disappear in the rearview mirror. "Forward," I said. "Just drive."